Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today we're going to talk about the impact of human activity on the biosphere, and specifically how the fact that humans have this ability to manipulate the environment and make decisions over other, I guess you could say, lower life forms, like other animals, let's say, and we can kind of guide their environment and manipulate it to our liking and to our discretion, rather. There was a research study and some results that came in that assesses the impacts of humans on evolution. So when I had to read this article a couple times and do a little deeper research into it to really understand what they're trying to say. That's because I'm slow. It's actually not that difficult read at all, actually. So on average, they found that human disturbances don't appear to accelerate the process of natural selection on average. Again, this is a very incomplete study as well. They have a long way to go. I just wanted to describe the premise and their initial findings, just to really help elucidate the picture that you may or may not have about evolution, because it kind of changed the way I looked at it. Because I if you were to ask me this question, whether humans accelerate natural selection and evolution in animals, I would probably say yes after thinking about it a couple times. This research, although it's not saying it definitively one way or another, there's a little ambiguity there where it merits further study. So basically the answer isn't obvious, but I think with a little bit of digging, the answer will become obvious. So there's a disclaimer at the beginning of this article. It says, while the finding may seem reassuring, this unexpected pattern could reflect a limited number of species for which data were available. So there have been other studies that show that species evolve in response to human activity at a pace that exceeds natural rates. So common examples are weeds and insect pests become resistant to pesticides. Pathogens become more resistant to antibiotics, like MRSA. If you guys know what that is, it's an antibiotic resistant form of staph that a lot of grapplers get, and other people as well. And also fish species just become smaller as humans over-harvest the bigger fish, or selectively harvest, rather. So that's what we're talking about here. These are the disclaimers that we're getting. So the fact that there have been studies that show that species do evolve in response to what humans are doing, so like farming and stuff like that, but it doesn't necessarily mean, on average, that some animals will become extinct and some won't, and some evolve faster and some won't. It just, human intervention speeds up the natural selection. It strengthens it. We make it more definitive, but it doesn't mean that we can guide their evolution, kind of like we do with dogs. Like, we domesticated dogs and other domesticated animals, and we can kind of select what traits we want, and then act on those choices accordingly. But anyway, let's continue. Rapid evolution in response to human activities could be caused by strengthening of natural selection, a key influence on the pace of evolution. Yeah, that's what I was saying. So humans, there's this thing called selection strength in these studies, and that's what they're talking about. The strength of natural selection can be increased because of human choices. Because of, we're human. Naturally, we have this ability to manipulate things. From McGill's Department of Biology, this team, they reviewed thousands of scientific papers on this topic, because there are a ton of them out there. And then of all of these, they only retained 40 that provide estimates of selection strength or mention selection strength. Basically, the extent to which a particular trait is linked to survival or reproductive success, or fitness, Darwinian fitness. You may understand it from that term. So they took the selection strength in the human disturbed environment and just their natural environment. So, for instance, one case that they studied was a weed species found in grassland sprayed or not sprayed with herbicides. One was involving a shark population before and after the construction of a beach resort, which altered the local mangrove habitat. So these are the kind of case studies that we're talking about here. So from 40 of these types of studies, the authors compiled 1,366 estimates covering 102 traits and 37 different species. Now, this is the part where I'm not clear on. They use statistical models, so I don't know exactly what statistical models they use. But anyway, they use some sort of mathematics to test if there was an overall trend of stronger selection in human disturbed conditions. So again, they're testing to see if there was a trend of stronger selection in the conditions that humans controlled, basically, or disturbed. While some disturbances cause very strong human-induced selection, others weaken selection, leading to no net effect on average when pooling all available studies. So that's why it says on average, humans don't alter the evolution, or they don't speed it up, because it's not like that with every single species. So if you added everything up, there is no net effect. Although some cases there is an effect and others there aren't, depending on the species again. Here's what the lead researcher says. The lead author, rather. He says that we are not arguing that human disturbances do not cause evolution. In fact, he believes the opposite. So he believes that human disturbances do cause evolution, but they just need to do more testing, because I guess the testing is not specific enough, or they need a larger sample size, which is part of the big deal, because there's only 40 that they studied from out of the thousands. And the author of this article sums it up nicely. He says, this finding doesn't really surprise, or it does surprise some evolutionary biologists, because a lot of them would say that humans do have a huge effect on the evolution of everything living in the biosphere. But instead, it highlights the challenge of quantifying evolutionary impacts of humans on the biosphere. So just taking the study of this wheat and pesticides, let's just take it as the most basic example. That's just one example, though. It's not a comprehensive list of everything that we touch, basically, as a human species. So just to give you more examples, most species in the author's database performed well. They had higher fitness, basically, in the disturbed environment, which can weaken estimates of selection strength for statistical reasons. So it kind of skews the data in one way, because the estimates become weaker. Because that's just one example in the disturbed environment. I hope I'm explaining this well. Biologists know many species who do poorly in human-impacted environments often go extinct in these environments, a phenomenon known as local extinction. Rates of local extinction have never been higher, yet no species included in our database became locally extinct. So they do acknowledge this thing called local extinction. So let's say you set up an oil rig in Huntington Harbor, and then a species of fish dies off within a certain radius of that new construction. So you can say that fish is locally extinct from that site of human impact, but other sites, that fish may still live. So you guys can kind of see now the issue with the study now, how you need to be very careful when studying something like this. Otherwise, you might not get data that supports or refutes what you're trying to, like your initial claim. And so there's a lot of gray area here. So again, rates of local extinction have never been higher. So there's a lot of that scenario that I talked about earlier going on, the oil rig, and then something gets extinct locally. But in their database, none of them became locally extinct in those 40 research articles that they pulled out. So part of the explanation for their main conclusion, which is there's no human impact on average, the researchers might be studying species that fare relatively better in such impacted environments than the average species on Earth, because one can only study the selection in species that survived in impacted environments. So the ones that they studied, of course they survived, because they're there to be studied. But the ones that don't survive, they're not even in the discussion because they are not there to be studied. So it's kind of they've got to rearrange their approach to how they want to study the human impact on the biosphere, because studying natural selection and human impacted natural selection not going to be easy to get to the bottom of whether humans accelerate or decelerate the process of natural selection. It's going to be hard because the stuff that dies, obviously it wasn't sped up for them. But is it? I mean, were there survivors? If there weren't any survivors and local extinction it becomes an issue, then I guess it answers the question that humans do affect the course of selection strength, but the species is dead, so it doesn't evolve. So I don't know. It seems like a really tough example to. It's a good example of how tough it can be to get to the bottom of a question like this. Now, why did I decide to do this article today instead of another history article? Well, I think it's good to talk about how difficult it is for some scientific studies to A, get going and get funding and stuff, but B, to really answer their question and re-alter the research and the experimental data. I mean, not the data, to tinker around with the methods, because their study went very well. Everything that they set out to do, they did, but it just was too vague. It didn't get to the bottom of their core issue, their core question, whether or not human disturbances accelerate or decelerate natural selection. And if you ask, again, when I said earlier in the video, most scientists, if you ask them that without any research, a lot of them will say, yeah. Even the average person will be like, yeah, probably. Just because the fact that you live in a city is proof of that, right? But it's not that simple. So let me know in the comments if you have any questions, or if you guys have read this study, your 2 cents, your 2 opinions on it. Your 2 opinions, your opinion on it, rather. If you've ever thought about this, or do you know anybody who's had an answer to this or any opinions, I would like to know, because I think this is going to be a question that's going to be floating around a long time in the scientific community, and I want to know what people's opinions are on it right now in 2018. So go ahead and leave a comment, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.